Imagine hearing that the failure of your strongest affirmations has less to do with weak belief and more to do with a basic misunderstanding in your dialogue with the universe itself. A popular notion claims that endlessly repeating upbeat statements will magnetize your goals. Nevertheless, countless people practice this ritual every day and grow more discouraged, noticing their problems not only persist, but appear to increase. We have been trained into striving into pushing positive thoughts and visualizations with strain and inner pressure. Yet Florence Scovel Shinn, celebrated as a major 20th century metaphysical mentor, discovered an insight that overturns this approach. She recognized that the conscious mind ruled by logic and anxiety behaves like a sentinel that blocks our deepest desires. As you affirm, "I am abundant," a counter voice snaps back, "Check your bank balance." Florence, however, held a key, a single irrefutable word, an anchor term that functions as a universal passkey, bypassing the skeptic at the gate and opening the vast field of the infinite mind where outcomes can unfold in mere hours. In this presentation, you will both learn that word and hear the real account of a man who, a single day from eviction, employed that simple term and triggered a remedy so precise and surprising that it defied rational expectation. If you're prepared to release struggle and allow yourself to receive subscribe and enable notifications, since the guidance ahead rarely appears in conventional self-help texts. The central barrier resides in linguistic duality. Whenever we assert a word, the subconscious immediately detects its contrary and offers it back as proof. Say, "I am rich," and your mind conjures scarcity. Declare, "I am healthy," and recollections of sickness rise to dispute you. This will against will struggle drains vitality and dilutes intention. With a refined grasp of universal principles, Florence Scovel Shinn discerned there must be a method to address source without triggering inner pushback. She pursued a term the rational mind could not gainsay, a concept so unmixed and complete it carries no opposite of formulation, that once spoken invites not debate, but immediate inner assent. This anchor term was not an invention of her own, but a re-encounter with an age-old spiritual law. It is a word that softens reasoning and addresses the higher self, the divine potency present within every life. Its aim is to still the clamor of doubt and become a conduit to the realm of limitless potential, where solutions already exist awaiting recognition. To grasp its force, mere theory will not suffice. We must step into the exact instant when a man called Arthur found himself at the brink. His account constitutes indisputable proof that a single word spoken with the right intention can transform material reality in a single moment. Arthur's crisis did not erupt with a crash, but with the gentle slide of an envelope under his door. It was a gray autumn afternoon, and the paper felt cold and dense between his fingers, as if it held within itself the weight of all his failures. It was not a simple letter, but a sentence, a legal document cold and impersonal that confirmed what his heart already sensed. The message, printed in stark black letters, admitted no ambiguity. Final notice of eviction. Legally, he had been given a final grace period now expired. Only 24 hours remained to settle the full amount or vacate his dwelling. No appeal existed, no reprieve remained. The remorseless machinery of the law had already engaged. This moment was the culmination of months of steady, painful deterioration. His modest import venture, once bright with promise, had crumbled after an ill-fated investment compounded by a sudden market shift. His savings, the harvest of years of labor, had evaporated like water on desert sand, poured into patching fissures of a vessel already doomed to sink. He now stood alone in a home that would shortly cease to shelter him, confronting humiliation and dread. New York, gleaming with limitless promises, loomed like a colossus of steel and glass, unmoved by his suffering. Time beat its strict measure, every tick-tock like a hammer striking the nail of his distress. Arthur was neither lazy nor rash. At his core, he was principled, habitually respectful of rules. He labored faithfully, behaved honorably, and maintained spiritual trust for years. But under the grinding pressure of lack, that trust fractured. He felt targeted by fate, as though the universe had barred him from the ease of abundance that appeared to pour so freely upon other people. In the quiet hours, he exhausted every method the manuals commended. He chanted prosperity statements while the thunder of his debts reverberated in thought. He attempted to picture wealth, yet the eviction notice blotted out every vision. He felt like a fraud, uttering faith-filled words that his circumstances contradicted with merciless clarity. He called to mind the person he had been, youthful, optimistic, persuaded that diligence and decency would suffice to build a flourishing life. Where had that assured version of himself disappeared to? When had his road veered so drastically? These questions gnawed at him, leaving him feeling betrayed, as though success's rules had been quietly rescinded. He had chased every logical avenue. He appealed to the remaining friends he could muster, and met only sympathetic glances and powerless palms. The bank had closed its doors to him long before. No human remedy appeared. He teetered at the rim of a financial chasm, the earth under him starting to crumble. Arthur's true prison was not in his external conditions, but in his own mind. His thinking, accustomed to analyzing and solving with logic, had become his enemy. It was now a relentless machine that calculated debts and projected futures full of misfortune. He could only see tangible facts: his empty account, the lack of work, and the time slipping away without compassion. Florence Scovel Shinn called this mental state carnal reasoning. It is the mind governed solely by what the senses perceive in the material world. Florence taught that this way of thinking cannot generate a miracle, for a miracle is by essence an effect whose cause does not reside in the visible or in reason, but in a higher law. Arthur's prayers were contaminated by that relentless logic. He begged for divine help with one part of himself, while another, the rational mind, whispered that it was useless. "I need the money for tomorrow," he said, and his intellect answered, "Where could it come from?" That inner division sent the universe a confused vibration, a mixture of longing and denial, a desire canceled out by doubt. His struggle mirrored a universal human pattern. We are trained to rely on what is visible, tactile, and quantifiable, even though the most profound changes emerge from a dimension beyond rational grasp. Arthur remained confined within the walls of the material, unaware that his release lay not in an ingenious strategy, but in relinquishing the compulsion to comprehend and control. At his blackest hour, when capitulation felt unavoidable, a memory rose the name of Florence Scovel Shinn, once mentioned by a former business associate. He had described her not as a spiritual teacher, but as a practitioner of truth who instructed people in the art of aligning the invisible laws of the universe in their favor. In bustling New York of those times, Florence was not a name in big headlines. Her renown traveled from mouth to mouth in the murmurs of those who had lived mysterious transformations. Those who came to her did not seek passive comfort, but precise and practical guidance. Her space was a spiritual workshop where fractured lives were restored by metaphysical instruments. With the eviction order tucked into his pocket, a continual reminder of his descent, Arthur chose a course his rational mind denounced as foolish. He used his final coins not for a meal, but for a streetcar to the address he had uncovered. It was an act of radical trust, a release of logic in favor of a distant, unsure possibility. As he made his way to Florence's building, every step weighed on him. He did not glow with cheerful confidence. He moved with the calm surrender of a person who has already lost everything. That journey was not just another appointment, but a pilgrimage that carried him from the world of the visible to the place of a woman who taught how to master the invisible. Florence Scovel Shinn's studio lacked ostentation. It was a peaceful room where the very air seemed imbued with calm certainty. Arthur, seated before her, told his story with the trembling voice of a defeated man. He recounted his obligations, the collapse of his enterprise, and the imminent eviction. He quietly hoped for consoling words. Instead, he received an assessment as exact as a surgeon's report. Florence listened with full attention, attuned not only to his statements, but to the energy they carried. Her sight moved past the material surface to the spiritual core of the issue. When he finished speaking, Florence declined to center the discussion on missing funds. She emphasized that the real source of pain was an interior conflict unfolding within his awareness. His desire for prosperity was being smothered by a long-standing conviction in insufficiency. Right then, she instructed him that the universe does not grant requests as such. It mirrors the vibrational level of one's consciousness. She explained that his affirmations resembled seeds scattered onto ground, compacted by fear and skepticism. Each time he declared, "I am prosperous," his subconscious, conditioned by long habit of anxiety, retorted, "No, you aren't." That rebuttal set the energetic tone the universe echoed to him. Arthur realized he was attempting to paint a fresh image on a blemished canvas. He was battling his own psyche, pushing himself to accept a claim that beneath the surface he could not genuinely endorse. Florence did not hand him an external miracle. Instead, she revealed that the decisive victory must occur inside his thought life. She then illuminated the roots of his self-sabotage. The subconscious serves as custodian of our most entrenched beliefs gathered across a lifetime. Its primary aim is protective, keeping us within what it deems normal and possible based on prior experience. For Arthur, hardship and scarcity had turned into the default setting. Consequently, his subconscious regarded abundance as foreign and potentially dangerous terrain. Announcing prosperity he had never known was like urging a watchdog to welcome an unfamiliar visitor. The protector naturally barks, resists, and clings to the familiar even when the familiar is painful. Florence clarified that such resistance is not malicious. It is a protective mechanism operating out of alignment with true good. Then the logical mind intervenes, demanding proof. Where is the money? In what way will it arrive? Finding no rational answers, it considers the affirmation an illusion or falsehood and tries even harder to return the mind to the known terrain of scarcity, its habitual refuge. This understanding was a true revelation for Arthur. He discovered he was not fighting a hostile external energy, but the very defense system his mind had created. What thwarted him was not a lack of openings, but a mental program that repelled assistance before it had a chance to appear. Thus, the initial movement toward a breakthrough was not chasing money, it was calming the inner sentinel. Florence then conveyed one of the most delicate yet potent spiritual principles, the law of non-resistance. Whatever we wage war against in our thinking becomes more entrenched. By straining to believe in abundance, he was feeding the battle itself, locking attention on combating doubt rather than resting in the outcome he sought. Florence explained that straining mentally signals uncertainty. Authentic faith carries no tightness, only calm and inward assurance. The strain Arthur experienced during affirmations indicated he was operating from ego's level, forcing a result rather than letting it arise from spirit. She offered a vivid analogy, envisioning a desire is like sowing a seed. Incessant mental effort is like unearthing it repeatedly to inspect its progress. This habit is not merely unhelpful, it disturbs the organic process of sprouting. True faith lies in sowing the seed, tending it with glad expectancy, and trusting the unseen wisdom of life to complete the work. Arthur realized his method had been misguided. He treated manifestation as a battle, a victory to be won by his own exertion. Florence pointed him to another way: surrender allowance, and trust a way where strength is found not in pushing, but in releasing opposition to the good that is his by divine inheritance. After establishing the principles, she moved to application. Florence leaned in softly, her tone carrying the weight of disclosure. To bypass the rational mind's resistance and still the inner quarrel, he would need a single word that the intellect could not analyze, argue with, or dismiss. She stressed that it should not be a complex sentence like "money comes to me," since such phrasing awakens skeptical counter-arguments. Rather, she would give him a term that points to the end state, the accomplished reality, containing the distilled essence of the divine response without prescribing its form. This word would act as a direct decree to the universal subconscious. Florence told Arthur that the word was impregnable. Because it was not part of his everyday vocabulary, his mind carried no negative history with it and could not easily mount a rational countercase. There was no inner argument whatsoever that contradicted it. In this context, impregnable represented a fortress or position impossible to defeat, dominate, or conquer. It was the proclamation of a total and definitive spiritual victory. Florence unfolded the deeper spiritual rationale behind the term's potency. Using impregnable in any circumstance did not narrate the problem or outline a fix. It affirmed the consummated outcome of divine activity. It served as a declaration to the cosmos: my faith and my good abide within a sacred stronghold no appearance-based force can penetrate. By adopting a term both abstract and forceful, Arthur kept his analytical mind from fastening on particulars that trigger skepticism. Had he proclaimed, "I'll get the money tomorrow," the mind would counter. By what means declaring his finances impregnable lifted the matter beyond the realm of how entrusting it to infinite intelligence, which needs no visible channel to operate. This exercise represented a mature application of what Florence termed speaking the word. It was not supplication, but proclamation, bringing human awareness into harmony with the divine viewpoint that knows only wholeness, completion, and triumph. The word acted as a spiritual frequency, dispersing fear and transmuting it into unwavering certainty. She stressed that its efficacy lay not in the syllables themselves, but in the depth of comprehension and trust that accompanied them. The term became a mental anchor, a stabilizing core, enabling him to hold attention on spiritual reality amid the turbulence of outer events. It would serve as his hidden instrument for the inner contest of the coming day. Nor did Florence send him away with theory alone. She provided an exact protocol, a ritual of faith for the crucial hours ahead. Straightforward as it was, the practice demanded unwavering mental steadiness. She instructed him to go back to his apartment, the very place that had embodied his dread, and reconsecrate it as a sanctuary of trust. Step 1. Write the word impregnable on a slip of paper. No extra phrases, only that word in capitals, and set it where he would see it often. This was not superstition. It was a cue for recentering the mind whenever fear attempted to seize control. The core directive followed whenever images of eviction, poverty, or despair surfaced. He was not to wrestle with them or plaster them over with positive thinking. Rather, he should gaze at the word or summon it inwardly and calmly decree, "My world and my affairs are impregnable." Then came the hardest part. After speaking the word, he must resume ordinary activities, cook, read, handle chores, as though the triumph were already secured. Such behavior constituted enacted faith, the final exam signaling to the universe that his reliance was anchored not in appearances, but in a steady inner assurance. The return streetcar ride felt unlike the journey out. Arthur's mind did not spin through schemes. It rested on one word. Externally, nothing had changed. Passers-by looked the same, and the sky stayed dull. Yet within, something shifted, not elation, but a quiet, enigmatic peace. Back home, the eviction notice still lay on the table, a silent herald of the physical world. Fear swelled for an instant. His pulse quickened and familiar questions returned. How can a word cover the rent? Have I gone mad? But now he had an anchor. Refusing to be carried off by panic, he picked up a page and with deliberate calm inscribed the term Florence had given him, impregnable. He set the paper beside the notice, forming a vivid juxtaposition, the edict of matter on one side, the pronouncement of spirit on the other. This was his first deliberate stand against the despotism of appearances. He neither tore up the notice nor pretended it didn't exist. He placed a superior truth next to it. That understated act inaugurated his change the moment he ceased to be merely a casualty of conditions and accepted his part as co-creator of his experience. Night stretched forward, bringing with it the most demanding trial. Resting in his chair, Arthur attempted to read. However, the text dissolved as fear's refrain pounded through his thoughts. What if this fails? The landlord arrives tomorrow. What's your plan? Where will you sleep? His analytical mind, the sentinel of doubt, mounted its fiercest offensive. In the center of that tempest, Arthur chose to practice Florence's instruction deliberately for the very first time. He neither pushed the thoughts away nor debated with them. Instead, he shut his eyes, drew a steady breath, and voiced the word not as a shout, but as a measured, unwavering declaration. He sensed its resonance pass through his chest. Following the instruction precisely, He then appended the complete statement with composure. My world and my affairs are impregnable. He did not attempt to manufacture a mood or produce passion. He spoke the truth and permitted the word to carry its own power. The response did not arrive as a blinding insight or dramatic miracle. It appeared subtler, more profound. The storm of anxiety did not disappear at once, yet its intensity waned. The word seemed to erect an unseen barrier around him. Worries remained, but they could not pierce his core like voices yelling beyond a silent glass wall. Arthur kept to the practice throughout the night. Whenever a flicker of doubt passed by, he met it with the same word, quiet, consistent, and sure. This was not a duel. It became a cadence, a meditative rhythm. The word no longer felt foreign. It fused with his inner current, forming a subtle yet potent field of protection around him. Gradually, the real interior wonder appeared, the prelude that precedes outward results. The gnawing anxiety of weeks ebbed, and in its place arose a profound peace. It was not the relief of one who knows the answer, but the composure of one who has placed the load into hands immeasurably wiser. He let go of obsessing over the how. The once tormenting questions ceased to matter. His sole assignment was to remain grounded in the conviction that his world stood impregnable. Anything else lay outside his remit. Relinquishing the compulsion to fix every variable embodied the surrender Florence deemed essential. For the first time in months, Arthur slept no restless tossing, no night terrors, only deep, replenishing rest. Unburdened of combat with doubt and saturated with assurance, his subconscious aligned with universal intelligence, stitching together the right outcome in the material realm. Arthur's experience that night embodied Florence Scovel Shinn's core lesson: faith is not strenuous thinking, but repose in the certainty of divine agency and end to inward warfare. Effortful forcing communicates distrust in the universe's guidance. For Arthur, impregnable unlocked this posture of deliberate surrender. It was not capitulation to loss. It was the yielding of ego and narrow intellect to the boundless knowing of spirit, an act both humble and paradoxically the most potent move a person can make. Releasing the urge to manage results, Arthur opened a clear channel for the answer to move into expression. The energy once swallowed by worry became available for manifestation. By stepping aside, he allowed the divine pattern to unfold. This remains among the most difficult spiritual lessons. The impulse to scheme and force is strong. Yet our highest work is to be still, to trust, and to allow. In the quiet of his room through the longest night, he had known Arthur came to this understanding at last. The universe, which continually waits upon our surrender, now moved. Arthur woke as dawn's first light slipped across the sill. For a moment, he recalled the stark fact today was eviction day, the turning point. Yet, a fundamental shift had occurred. The frozen knot of panic that had gripped him for months had melted away. In its place was a vibrant ease, a serenity that reason could not account for. He resisted the urge to glance down the hall for the landlord or to fret over his empty wallet. In line with Florence's counsel to act naturally, he rose, washed, and made coffee in silence. Each small action was deliberate and calm. He carried himself like someone who, against all odds, expects a welcome visitor rather than a messenger of doom. The clock still measured minutes, yet Arthur no longer felt time draining from him. He had stepped into what Florence termed divine time. From the standpoint of spiritual awareness, lateness does not exist. Provision appears at the exact right moment, often seemingly at the 11th hour, to validate steadfast trust. His calm now functioned as armor. No longer aligned with fear or lack, he ceased to broadcast or receive those signals. Correspondingly, under the law of attraction, such energies could not touch him. His inner magnet had been reset. In the hush of morning, he lingered quietly as though watching a chessboard, inwardly sure that an unseen benevolent power was about to make a decisive move for him. Toward mid-morning, a sound arrived, a distinct, steady knock. It carried none of a bailiff's severity nor a landlord's impatience. It felt measured, even courteous. Arthur's heart thumped once strong, not from terror, but from clear expectancy. The hour had come. What mattered most lay just beyond the door. As he walked to it, a single word repeated softly within. Impregnable, no supplication, but a statement of fact. He opened to meet whatever awaited, upheld by inner quiet. There stood not his landlord, but a stranger well-to-do in appearance, neatly attired, his face warm. The man smiled and addressed Arthur by his full name. Startled yet steady, Arthur affirmed his identity. The visitor gave his name and profession, a landscape painter who had once made New York his home. In his early years, he had lived in this exact flat. The rooms were dear to him. Here, he had produced the first canvases that launched his career. He emphasized that today's call stemmed from sentiment alone. Puzzled yet courteous, Arthur welcomed him inside. The painter stepped through, moving with evident nostalgia, speaking of the morning light that poured through the windows and how it had sparked his creativity long ago. He recounted episodes from those striving, hope-filled days, and Arthur listened, sensing a strange bond with the tale, though still unsure of the visit's purpose. After a brief exchange, the painter became direct. He acknowledged that fortune now smiled on him, and that he wished to honor his beginnings by sharing part of the good he had received. Then, meeting Arthur's gaze, he made an utterly unforeseen offer. He had long wanted a compact city studio, a retreat for inspiration when passing through, and this apartment, for its sentimental value, was the sole place he truly wanted. Without any small talk, he directly asked Arthur whether he'd transfer the lease and vacate the apartment. Then he added the sentence that clarified the entire encounter. "I understand this causes you great inconvenience," he said, "so I wish to compensate you generously for the trouble. I offer you a substantial sum so you can quickly find a new home and settle in without difficulty if you agree to do it now." Time seemed to halt for Arthur. He wrestled to absorb the proposal. A complete stranger appearing out of the blue was offering to pay him to depart the very flat he was on the verge of being evicted from. The cosmic irony felt so exquisite, he nearly laughed. Keeping his voice steady, Arthur asked what amount the painter envisioned. The man named a figure, and at once Arthur sensed a precise inner click, like finely meshed Swiss cogs. This was clearly not an arbitrary sum. It matched down to the last unit the full arrears he owed his landlord together, with enough to cover multiple months' rent at a new place and a modest reserve to restart. Nothing superfluous, nothing missing, only what was required for complete and final resolution. The response felt perfectly tailored, as though orchestrated by boundless intelligence. The divine does not operate through waste or want. It delivers exact provision by channels at once unexpected and beautifully aligned. It was not a mysterious check or a prize of chance that appeared, but a human solution apparently logical yet miraculous in its exactness and perfect timing. The artist, wishing to finalize the agreement without delay, pulled out his checkbook and a pen. He said that if Arthur accepted, he could hand him the check immediately. Wrapped in reverent astonishment, Arthur could only nod. He watched as the man wrote the date, his name, and that figure that would completely transform the course of his life. Minutes later, Arthur was holding the check, a plain sheet of paper that nonetheless embodied in concrete form a word uttered in faith. It served as tactile proof that unseen laws can carry the same firmness as material ones. His problem had not been solved by ordinary procedures. It had been undone by the action of a superior principle. When the landlord arrived an hour after Stern and prepared to enforce eviction, he encountered a wholly transformed Arthur. With composed certainty, Arthur explained what had transpired and presented a check settling the debt in full. The landlord's startled expression signaled the final seal of triumph. Arthur had not merely preserved his dwelling. He had gained something far richer. Through lived proof, he recognized he was no captive of circumstance. He discovered an interior power, able to reshape any situation, however dire, whenever his mind stood aligned with spiritual reality. A few days afterward, Arthur revisited Florence Scovel Shinn's studio. He no longer resembled the defeated man from his first visit. His stance was upright, and his eyes shone. He narrated each remarkable step: the painter's arrival, the unexpected proposal, and the uncanny exactness of the sum. Florence listened, smiling gently, showing no surprise. To her, this was not some rare marvel, but the ordinary, reliable working of divine principle. She maintained that a miracle never violates nature. It simply discloses a higher law, overruling a lesser one. In this way, the law of scarcity yielded to the law of limitless provision. Florence told Arthur that the painter's appearance was not accidental. He was what she termed an instrument of the divine channel. Once Arthur aligned himself with faith and non-resistance, the infinite mind source of all solutions coordinated the exact people, locations, and conditions to bring forth his good. Stirred by his personal desire, the artist played his part in the plan unconsciously. At that point, Arthur grasped the core lesson: his job was never to hunt for the right person or concoct tactics. It was to purify his consciousness. Once he did, he functioned like a magnet, drawing into view the answer that already existed in the unseen, waiting solely for his inward readiness to appear. Arthur's experience is more than a tale of sudden provision. It is a deep lesson on deliberate faith and the practice of non-resistance. In hardship, most of us do the reverse. We fret, tense up, and push for outcomes, thereby closing the door on higher help. Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching is that true faith is not straining, but yielding, releasing the ego's compulsion to manage every detail and entrusting it all to the supreme wisdom that orders the universe. The analytical intellect is useful for daily decisions, yet it cannot produce miracles. Fear and doubt emit interference, jamming the signal by which guidance and supply arrive. Arthur's anchor word served as the instrument to quiet that static. It did not flip outer conditions at once. It erased the only real barrier, the inward resistance to the already present answer. The universe moves in continual generosity. Abundance, peace, and precise solutions stream without pause. Our task is not to manufacture the current, but to stop resisting its course. Arthur's case shows that once inner struggle ceases, life moves swiftly to overflow us with gifts beyond expectation. The narrative has repeatedly named the term that reshaped his destiny. Now it is your turn to take it up not as theory, but as a working instrument along your journey. The single word Florence Scovel Shinn applied to rise above the reasoning mind and anchor awareness in unwavering trust is impregnable. Say it within, impregnable. Sense its solidity. Its force allows no rival. The intellect cannot mount a countercase. To declare your health impregnable is to affirm it rests inside a sacred stronghold, untouched by the show of disease. To assert your peace is impregnable is to hold it safe from the world's turbulence. To affirm your provision is impregnable is to lift awareness above mere figures and root it in the reality of the infinite everlasting source. This term functions as your declaration that the good that is yours by divine inheritance cannot be harmed, reduced, or stolen by worldly conditions. Apply it as Arthur did, not as a frantic request, but as a decree of a reality already complete in spirit. Let it be your stabilizing anchor in tempests. Record it, contemplate it. Allow its tone to melt uncertainty and usher you into calm, bright expectation, confident that your good is safeguarded and moving toward you. To move this teaching beyond uplift into real change, follow these specific actionable steps right away. First, identify the domain where tension or deficiency feels strongest. Perhaps money, relationships, health and well-being, or your career trajectory. Second, rather than stating what you want, statements that often provoke pushback, declare firmly that the condition at hand is impregnable. If finances are tight, avoid "I will be rich" and instead affirm "my divine supply is impregnable." Notice the shift. The former points to a far-off target. The latter claims a current reality. Third, when fear or doubt surfaces, do not wrestle with it. With quiet resolve, repeat, "My peace is impregnable. My health is impregnable." Let the word act like a shield, redirecting negativity without engaging in combat. Finally, and most crucial, conduct yourself as though the decree were already fact. Move through your day with calm assurance that infinite intelligence is coordinating all details for your good. Set down the urge to figure out the method or the timeline. Your sole responsibility is to keep your state anchored in trust, recalling that your inner fortitude is and has always been impregnable. Arthur's journey, together with Florence Scovel Shinn's instruction, points to a plain yet freeing conclusion. The capacity to reshape your world is not anchored in outside forces, the market, other individuals, or luck. That capacity resides in your spoken word when it proceeds from a consciousness aligned with truth. Your consciousness is the decisive reality. Whatever you maintain within it with steadfast faith and firm conviction must eventually take form in your lived experience. For ages, many of us have permitted fear and skepticism to encroach upon that inner sanctuary, and life has mirrored exactly that permission. Now a key has been given to help you repossess your inner ground. The word impregnable transcends the concept of technique. It is a reminder of who you truly are. You are a spiritual being whose natural inheritance is abundance, joy, and peace. Anything that opposes this truth is only an appearance, a shadow without real power, unless you yourself strengthen it with your fear or attention. Do not allow this understanding to fade. Embrace it, put it into practice, and prepare to see how doors begin to open. Get ready to receive your own unexpected visits and personal divine solutions. The same power that acted in Arthur's life nearly a century ago is available to you today, here, and now. Use it and claim the magnificent destiny that belongs to you. Remember that the teachings of Florence Scovel Shinn are a powerful tool for inner transformation. The results reflect the measure of your faith and the constancy of your conscious application. Use this insight to mold your prosperity. Leaving Florence's studio, Arthur felt cloaked in a quiet, unseen armor of certainty. He did not yet realize that what lay ahead was the beginning of a fresh path. As Florence liked to remind her students, a miracle is simply the lifting of the stage curtain, a signal that awareness has shifted. The deeper alchemy unfolds in the seemingly ordinary days that follow. In the aftermath of the painter's visit, Arthur sensed subtle but definite change, not just because money had arrived, but because he now approached life with an awareness he had never attained, despite all earlier striving. During the initial days, Arthur noticed something unusual. He no longer had to build elaborate affirmations or recite like a dutiful pupil pledges to the universe. A single word sufficed. It came to him whenever his thoughts quivered, like a gentle but steadfast sentinel containing doubt before it hardened into turmoil. And whenever that word sounded voiced inwardly or breathed aloud, he sensed a stream of composed strength flowing through his whole being. Moving through the city's rush, he realized that occasions that previously stirred anxiety now met with calm. He walked by the storefront of an old acquaintance, a spot that once triggered embarrassment about an unpaid bill. This time, the feeling shifted not because the balance had been cleared, but because he no longer permitted fear to squat in his inner domain. He understood that stale fear rarely evaporates just because circumstances shift. It dissolves when we deny it lodging within consciousness. Florence frequently taught, "What you consent to in your consciousness is what you will see blossom in your life." Arthur now truly began to grasp this. As the word impregnable settled deeper, it did more than clear away doubts. It established a fresh internal arrangement, a constellation of poise and steadiness that oriented his days. He further perceived a faint updraft carrying his routine like a helpful breeze, smoothing the path before him. While looking for new lodging, he wandered into an unfamiliar neighborhood and met an unexpectedly gracious landlady. She explained that the room typically rented instantly, yet oddly, it had stood empty for weeks thanks to several last-minute cancellations. In a near whisper, she added that she favored tenants in whom she could feel a good vibration right away. Her remark touched Arthur not for any mystical flourish, but because it matched Florence's lesson, exactly alter your inner frequency, and the blossoms of the outer world naturally incline toward you. Minor exchanges, a brief street conversation, a surprise call, a casual coffee invite from an old coworker started to carry a new timbre. Arthur questioned whether he was overlaying metaphysics onto chance, yet day by day it grew undeniable that a quiet, orderly current was at work beneath events. What he hadn't fully recognized, and what Florence continually underscored, is that when consciousness shifts, change does not confine itself to a single department of life. The whole energetic pattern a person radiates is retuned. Interior renewal does not yield just one result. It generates a new field of resonance, and every sphere of living responds by adjusting. One afternoon, as he packed for the move, Arthur uncovered a small wooden box he had forgotten on a high shelf. Inside lay sketches and notes from the era when his import shop thrived, when hope outweighed anxiety. He sat, fingers faintly shaking. In that pause, he perceived what had always been hidden in plain sight. His failure did not originate with a poor investment. It began the instant he ceased trusting his own worth. Those modest papers mirrored a different version of him, the man who had risked opening a shop, who dreamed audaciously, who trusted a horizon others couldn't see. He ran his fingers over the yellowed sheets as though laying a hand on his younger heart. In a sudden, deep moment, it felt as if an unseen cord drew itself taut again. Arthur recognized that mending was underway. Viewing fragments of his past, he no longer saw defeat. He saw a fighter courageous, now re-emerging with greater wisdom. In that instant, he softly breathed the known word, free of strain or tightness, as effortless as inhaling impregnable. The sound moved through him like a luminous filament woven across his whole narrative, stitching present to past, while quietly unfastening the door to his future. He found himself asking if Florence had recognized this from their first encounter, if she had perceived that he required not an outward marvel, but a key to unseal a doorway he himself had kept barred for so long. And that simple, potent key was the single word she had placed in his hands. Moving day arrived beneath an unseasonably gentle warmth. Arthur paused at his former doorway for a final moment, not in grief, but in gratitude. He gave thanks for the shadowed nights that compelled him to choose a different road, for the collapse that pried loose a complacent ego so truer wisdom could enter, for each pain that cleared a passage to a sturdier, renewed faith. He drew a long breath and repeated gently yet deliberately, impregnable. It was not an attempt to reject the facts before him. It was a clear affirmation that from this moment forward, all would be governed and safeguarded by a sacred higher order. In his new residence, Arthur adopted a fresh cadence. Each morning, he paused for several quiet minutes, breathing and letting his awareness soak in the sense of inner invulnerability. The practice was never strained or mechanical. It became as ordinary as brushing his teeth or lacing his shoes. That calm spread through his body into his muscles, his heartbeat, and the tone of his thoughts. One morning, as he sipped his coffee, the telephone rang. An old friend described a role tailored to Arthur's strengths, a consulting position in import operations for a growing firm. No capital outlay was required, and he wouldn't shoulder managerial headaches. He would simply employ the very talents that had always drawn him toward commerce. It was more than employment. It validated that his past was not dead weight, but a meaningful inheritance. He accepted the meeting. At the interview, he avoided posturing. He simply showed up as himself, the renewed self he had become. Walking out, he realized there was no anxious waiting inside him. His outlook had shifted so deeply that he trusted, regardless of the decision, the result would be the most harmonious. Experience had already shown that when he maintained his consciousness rightly, doors opened at the fitting moment. A week on the firm offered him an immediate start. Arthur recognized this was not random luck. It was the predictable outcome of a consciousness realigned with spiritual principle. Over the ensuing months, whenever adversity surfaced, he went back to his secret word, like a mariner checks a compass, not to flee the storm, but to hold a steady heading through it. The more consistently he spoke it, the clearer the insight became. The world is rarely against us. We oppose the world only when we forget our real nature. Rooted in inner solidity, Arthur started to notice the subtle connections among happenings, individuals, and openings. Though outwardly things looked scattered, he sensed each part followed an elegant order the rational mind cannot fully map. One evening, journaling by lamplight, he grasped what Florence had long sought to teach: trust is not forced belief. It is relinquishing the urge to control outcomes. He saw that freedom arises the moment we stop fearing what is ahead, grieving what is behind, and condemning what is now. From then on, one lives from a center of quiet, a fortress within that nothing external can rattle. And this, at its heart, is what impregnable means. Through consistent effort, he put aside a modest reserve. It wasn't great wealth, yet it brought a sense of safety. At that point, a gentle but compelling notion surfaced. Maybe it was time to revive his original vision of a small import service, not as a rash bet, but as a conduit for real value. This time, he refused to hurry. He allowed the idea to sprout like the seed from Florence's parable. He did not press with "when will funding come? When will clients show?" He affirmed instead that if the desire belonged to the divine design, the avenues and resources would open naturally. During an informal chat with his supervisor, he mentioned this calling. To his surprise, his boss not only approved, but proposed a partnership. The firm planned a new branch and needed someone seasoned and dependable. Arthur did not attribute this to chance. He understood events align by law. When consciousness changes, conditions around it rearrange. On the day they signed the agreement, Arthur paused before a mirror and adjusted his tie. The reflection was no longer the man who shook at the sight of bills or sank beneath uncertainty. He saw a person who knew that authentic good emerges from inward quiet, a man who had learned that no outer event can overcome a consciousness that stands invulnerable. He made no sweeping proclamation. He merely allowed the familiar word to thrum through him like a steady pulse, impregnable. In the months ahead came fresh tests, a postponed license, a faulty consignment, a supplier revising terms. Still, Arthur refused to relapse into old terrors. He would sit, breathe, speak his word, and the tangles would ease, sometimes through sharper intuition, sometimes through timely encounters with just the right person. He recognized the deeper cause. His inner being no longer resisted the flow of life. One afternoon, poring over the firm's ledgers, he saw clearly that he was at last entirely free of debt. The totals had not leapt in a single night. They had advanced steadily, as though an unseen hand had guided every entry into place. He set his pencil down on the desk. There sat the man who had come close to ruin and then rebuilt his life through one word. Closing his eyes, he felt for the first time in many years deep gratitude toward himself, toward the one who had dared to trust the invisible and follow the guidance of a spiritual mentor known only to a few. He recalled Florence and in memory heard her words. When consciousness takes its right place, everything else falls into its own. Arthur understood that his life could not revert to what it had been. He had stepped into another plane of being where fear lacks authority, where difficulties cannot unseat him, and where one radiant truth stands clear. No external fact can breach the inner fortress of a person who truly knows himself. Arthur's experience stands as a testament. Above all, it spotlights the principle Florence hoped to bequeath to tired hearts. Every individual holds the key to personal freedom. That key is not pleading, not forced belief, not anxious striving to bend destiny. It is surrender. It is quiet within. It is the sure knowledge that we belong to a sacred order, surpassing all material ebb and flow. Once this is realized, outer events no longer shake the center. A bill can be viewed without quaking. A hospital can be entered without crumbling. A loss can be met without hopelessness, because one knows the innermost spark, the core of identity, remains impregnable. When rightly grasped and practiced, the word is not mere sound. It becomes a state of being, the base of equanimity, the column on which wonders stand. For those who dwell in that vibration, life no longer feels random. It becomes a holy conversation between soul and universe, an exchange in which responses show up at the fitting hour, in the proper shape, and in exact proportion. If you have journeyed to this point, it suggests a part of you is already prepared to receive, as Arthur did. You need not feel absolute certainty or sudden strength. You need only a seed of willingness, a small wish to set down the long-carried inner fight. Transformation seldom starts with thunderclaps. It starts with quiet. And in that quiet, a single word turns the handle. Allow the word to resonate within. Do not force and do not strain to believe. Let it sink into your chest, ride the rhythm of your breath, and come to rest in the deepest chamber of your soul. Impregnable. From this point onward, your life will be authored from the inside out, and the unwritten chapters already wait, inviting you to open and live them.